A young woman smiles brightly at the camera next to a soldier she has recently married. She has bright blue eyes and a smile on her red lips that illuminates her face and reaches her eyes. Her name is Constance Reed, a free-spirited woman from London who is rather excited to marry the Baronet Clifford Chatterley, a short, stocky nobleman who is also a soldier during World War I. Clifford is going to the front on the day after the wedding, and because they were afraid of something tragic happening to him, they decide to get married. Clifford's mother isn't very happy with the sudden wedding, not that either one of them cares. After all, a night filled with passion is what awaits them before Clifford leaves. As she talks to her sister Hilda after the wedding, Constance admits she thinks Clifford is thoughtful, kind, and makes her feel safe. Clifford comes from a very conservative family, but he's quite progressive, which works for an open-minded woman such as Constance. Hilda is a bit skeptical about her sister's wedding because Constance is too passionate for her own good. Before meeting Clifford, she had a brief, though ardent, relationship with a German boy. He died and left a broken-hearted Constance behind. Hilda is afraid that her sister is going to get hurt again because she opens her heart too easily. Their conversation is interrupted by Clifford, who brings them drinks to celebrate before the reception. Clifford tells Constance that their fathers are preparing their toast, and Constance wonders if they could face the dreadful men together. Clifford softly smiles at her and replies that they can. Then he compliments her, saying that she looks stunning. He's quite the taken man. At the reception, Clifford's father is the first to toast the couple, wishing for a happy marriage and grandchildren. Clifford interrupts him by saying that wasn't the reason why they had married. But his father jokes that there isn't any other reason for a baronet to get married besides to father children. Everyone at the party, but Constance and her father, laugh at the joke. Clifford politely corrects his father and says that he married because he found her. Constance's father also makes a brief toast to thank the guests for donating their butter and sugar rations so the wedding could happen and to the heir that is going to come from their union. Constance and Clifford dance and laugh at their reception. It's obvious they are infatuated with each other and have a good relationship. During the nuptials, after Clifford makes fun of his father's speech, Constance asks him if he wants to have children. He replies that he does, but only if she does too. They kiss for some time and Clifford admits to being nervous about going to the front and something bad happening to him. Constance comforts him and they get intimate for the first time. The following morning, Clifford leaves after he promises to write to Constance every day. She's very sad and worried that he's going to war, especially because he'll be in a very dangerous position. Time goes by and the war finally ends, though not without severe consequences to Constance and Clifford. He saw too much tragedy, death, and pain, and going back to a normal life is hard. To make things harder, after a bombing, Clifford is paralyzed from the waist down and needs constant help. They moved to Clifford's family estate in Rugby 6 months after the war ended, and Constance is not as happy-go-lucky as she was before. She writes to her sister that she knew the war would change them all, but she had no idea it would change everything. Constance is not excited to move from London to an isolated house in the middle of nowhere. The estate is huge, almost like a castle, with several servants and a governor. Because Clifford is in a wheelchair, he decides to use the estate's library as a master bedroom. He has also started a writing career after the war, so it's the perfect place for him. The library is also the place where Clifford's father was found lifeless after his heart gave out, so not the most romantic place for a newlywed couple. Constance doesn't let it bother her too much. Clifford gives her the whole second floor to use, since he won't need it. Constance goes on a tour around the estate, and it's even more bleak than it looked. It's filled with stuffed animals and antiques. Constance goes to a bedroom on the second floor that has all the family portraits and an old bed. It's there that she's going to spend most of her time. At night, Constance helps Clifford to get ready for bed. They joke around and kiss as she helps him. Clifford tells her that he wants to turn a short story of his into a novel, and asks if she will be his editor. Constance chuckles and replies that she'll be proofreader, typist, and everything else. They lie down close together and Constance lovingly kisses a scar on Clifford's chest that he got in battle. Clifford smiles at her and they kiss. Constance tries to initiate intimacy with him using only his hands, but Clifford freezes and tells her he can't do that anymore. He apologizes and Constance tells him not to worry, that it's fine, but she's obviously bothered by the slight. Their previous carefree evening turns into a tense moment between the couple. Clifford tries to reassure Constance that they will be happy living in Rugby. She shrinks in his hold as she suddenly worries about how her life is going to be from there on, especially with Clifford's rejection of intimacy. Next day, Constance and Clifford interview new employees to work at the estate. One man in particular catches Clifford's attention, a man called Oliver Millers. Oliver is tall, strong, and confident. He also used to work there for Clifford's father before the war, and during the war he was an officer, so it's surprising to Clifford that he wants to work as a gamekeeper. The serious, handsome man explains that after the war, and all the atrocities that he witnessed, he wishes for a quiet life. Clifford hires him on spot. Days go by, and Constance spends her time being Clifford's helper and managing the estate. She writes to Hilda again that they finally have a full staff to manage the estate, and that though Clifford's stronger, she's the only one he lets help him. He also writes all the time and is almost finished with his first novel, with Constance's assistance of course. She is at his beck and call all day long, and when she isn't with him, she feels alone. She misses London and their fast-paced life filled with parties and happiness, and though they had a party at the estate, it was a men-only party with Clifford's bachelor friends as guests. Constance tries to have some fun, but it's pointless. The men only talk to each other, and the subjects aren't interesting for her. With a lack of activity, Constance feels bored and lonely. Even her sister can't come visit her because she's traveling with her new beau, so Constance has an idea to go visit her in London instead. She talks to Clifford about it, but he denies it because he won't accept any help from the staff to take care of him. Constance feels upset about Clifford's unwillingness to compromise and leaves him to go for a walk. Clifford tries to prevent her from leaving again, saying that she doesn't need anything to go for a walk, but Constance has had enough of the estate and the solitude, so she goes. She runs around the greening fields surrounding the estate and stops by a stream to stone skip. While she's there having a bit of fun, a shepherd dog appears and jumps in the water. Constance says hello to the dog and hears someone whistling and calling him back. Constance follows the dog and sees a man standing on the bridge waiting for him. The man is Oliver Mellors. Constance stares at him playing with the dog for a moment, then turns around and leaves with a soft smile on her face. When she returns home, it's time for Clifford's bath. As she helps him into the bath, she excitedly talks about the stream that she found. Clifford commiserates that he won't be able to go there anymore, but Constance, still in high spirits, tells him they can find a way. Clifford doesn't say anything. While she's helping him into the bath, he tries to do it by himself. When he manages, Constance compliments him and says that it's getting easier for him to do things by himself. Clifford weakly chuckles and replies that she must hate him sometimes. Constance denies it, but Clifford says that he doesn't blame her and that there are times he'd rather he had not made it back alive. Constance pleads with him not to talk like that again, and he tells her that he would be lost without her. She smiles and leaves him to his bath while saying that it's a beautiful day outside. Clifford suggests that she goes to a fair in town, and Constance's good mood instantly sours. She wishes Clifford would at least try to do things with her despite writing and staying at the house. She tries to mask her sadness and replies that she might go. Later that day, Constance rides her bike to the fair with a downtrodden expression. When she gets to the fair and sees people dancing, laughing, and having a good time, her humor lifts a bit. Some of the folk there greet her and she even stops to talk to a school teacher called Mrs. Flint and her baby when suddenly a bunch of miners protesting invade the fair and almost throttle Constance to the ground. She finds out then that a lot of miners are not happy with their work conditions and are protesting in all the towns. After the scare, she goes back home. The following day, Constance and Clifford finally leave the house to go on a walk. While on the way, his wheelchair gets stuck in the mud. Oliver was around to help, and for the first time, Constance and him met. Constance asks him if he's been in Rugby for long and he replies that he was raised there. He pushes the wheelchair out of the mud and Constance thanks him for the help. When she's leaving with Clifford, she looks back to Oliver. The couple goes to a place where Clifford used to go when he was younger. It has a great view of the grounds and forest. While there, Clifford confesses to Constance that he feels for the fact that he won't be able to have a child there than in any other place. She tells him she's sorry that they can't have one when Clifford has the strangest idea. He tells her that it might be a good idea for her to get pregnant with another man. Constance is quite shocked that he would propose something like that and she tells him so, and Clifford explains that he knows how much she wants to have a child. This way, she could have one to dote on and to fill her days with. He continues saying that people don't know that he can't father children and that they could raise them in Rugby. Constance asks if Clifford is being serious and he replies that he wouldn't want her to have feelings for the man. But being intimate is different from married life. That if she's able to leave feelings out of the equation, then it would be as simple as going to the dentist. As for Constance, she finds the idea preposterous and she can't believe that Clifford is willing to do something like that. She asks him if he would find no issue with the child of another man, and he denies it. She asks if he would want to know who the man is, and he says he doesn't. The only thing he wants is that the relationship remains a secret and that there are no feelings involved. Constance wonders if an heir means that much to Clifford, and he replies that it means to the people that reside there. She takes a deep breath and tries not to cry. Their return home is quiet and awkward. Constance has a lot on her mind, and as soon as they arrive at the estate, she leaves Clifford behind. She is troubled and doesn't know what to say to Clifford's indecent proposal. A couple of days later, he throws another party for his friends. Constance is bored out of her mind and goes to have a drink when one of her husband's friends approaches her. He starts flirting with her and Clifford sees it. After the party, he says that he won't invite the man anymore. Constance finds it abrupt and strange, but doesn't say anything. Clifford then mentions that she must eat because she's wasting away, and Constance retorts that she isn't feeling well, and hasn't been since their conversation about children. Clifford completely ignores her in favor of reading a review of his novel in the newspaper. The review is a bad one and calls his views on society old and a wonderful display of nothingness. Constance, though still annoyed at him, tells him it's just one review. Clifford agrees with the review and adds that a home, love, intimacy, marriage, and friendship are all nothing. Constance gets even more upset with him and leaves the table before he can continue spilling his view on life. She goes to the hideous bedroom filled with the family's portraits and cuts all the portraits off the wall on a whim. While she's commiserating in the bedroom, Hilda visits her, much to her relief. She hugs her sister and starts crying. Hilda sees that her sister is not as lively as she used to be. Her cheeks are sunken and she looks sick. She asks Constance if no one has been looking after her, and she jokingly answers that the portraits have. Then she admits she's tired. Hilda comforts her and starts reorganizing the bedroom. Next, Hilda goes after Clifford and complains that her sister is exhausted and thin. Then she pokes him by saying that it doesn't suit Constance to be a half-virgin, and Clifford retorts that his chair doesn't suit him either. Hilda says her sister needs a doctor and that she's going to take her to a doctor she trusts. She also informs Clifford that he must find someone else to take care of him personally, to which he replies he's perfectly well. She tells him she doesn't care about him and that she already found someone to take care of him, Mrs. Bolton. The woman had already taken care of him when he was young, so it was a person he knew. Mrs. Bolton soon arrives at the estate. With her there, Constance can take care of herself and not worry about Clifford anymore. Hilda goes back to London. Clifford asks Constance to go to the gamekeeper to ask him if the pheasants are lying, and she goes. The gamekeeper's cottage is almost hidden in the woods, in a very peaceful and isolated place. When she reaches the cottage, Constance accidentally sees Oliver nude and taking a shower. She turns around and smirks while hearing the splash of water as he showers. When he finishes, she waits a moment and knocks on his door. Oliver is surprised to see her there, and asks if Clifford needs help. Constance denies it and Oliver politely asks her to come in. He's wearing his underclothes only, and apologizes for his lack of decency. Constance dismisses his worries and asks him about the pheasants. While Oliver is talking about the birds, Constance talks a look around the rustic cottage. She tells him it's a lovely place and wonders if he resides alone. He does. She sees his small collection of books and asks if he reads a lot, and Oliver replies that it suits his solitary nature. She remarks that it must be very quiet there, but Oliver says he has his dog for company. Constance thanks him and leaves the cottage. Before she leaves for good, she sees some wildflowers and Oliver tells her to pick some up. Constance happily picks up a bunch of flowers and goes to Mrs. Flint's house to give some of them to her. Constance enjoys the time with Mrs. Flint with a bit of gossip. She compliments Oliver, saying that he seems gruff at first, but very interesting, and Mrs. Flint adds that the teachers still talk about how clever he was at school. She also tells Constance that he used to be married, but his wife, Bertha, had affairs with multiple men when he was serving. Everyone in town knew about it, but they never divorced properly. His wife is currently living with another man while Oliver resides alone in his cottage. In the evening, when she's alone in her bedroom, Constance has an intimate moment with herself. The following morning, Mrs. Bolton tells her about her life and how she lost her husband when he was only 28. He worked in the mines and there was an explosion that he couldn't escape. Mrs. Bolton prepares Clifford's breakfast as she talks, and Constance tells her that she doesn't need to do that because she's not his servant. The woman doesn't mind. Constance goes on a walk again. She hears a hammering sound in the woods and decides to follow it to see who is there. She finds Oliver in a shed preparing cops for the new chicks and decides to watch him working. He invites her to his hut and lights a fire for her even when she says it's not necessary. He leaves her there in front of the fire and goes back to hammering in the shed. Despite the repetitive sound, Constance finds the moment quite peaceful. Oliver watches her relax in his home with a certain curiosity. Constance looks back at him and he looks away. She starts watching him instead, as if he's an enigma, and she wants to figure him out. Tired of covertly watching him, she approaches him and makes small talk about the hut. Constance asks him for a key to the place so that she could go there when she wanted the peace and quiet. Oliver finds it strange that a baronet's wife would want to be in a dingy hut in the middle of the woods. He tells her that he doesn't have another key, and Constance replies that she will see to it herself. Then she goes away. When she arrives back at home, Clifford is there waiting for her for their afternoon tea. He sarcastically tells her that she had quit the walk, but Constance brushes it off and starts to prepare the tea for him. She asks if he knows about the key to the hut, that she wants to go there and read her book. He criticizes her choice in author, which is the same that she saw at Oliver's house. Clifford not so subtly asks if Oliver was at the hut, and Constance confirms, adding that he didn't like her intrusion. Clifford asks what he said for her to think that, and she answers that it was just his manner. Clifford remarks that he's that way because he had autonomy and a measure of power as a lieutenant. But now he's just the gamekeeper at another person's state, and has to follow orders. The rainy season starts and makes Constance's life miserable. She can't go out and explore as she enjoyed. She could only stay at home doing nothing with Clifford. When the rain gives a break, she goes back to the hut with a book and materials to write a letter to Hilda. She tells her sister about her life and about Oliver. While she's writing her letter, Oliver appears. She stands up and tells him she's going, but instead of letting her go, he shows her the key to the hut and informs her that he's going to leave it there until they find another one. Constance is touched by his action, especially because she thought she was invading his precious space. He gives her the key and leaves her be. Days go by and Constance falls into a routine. She goes on walks and visits the hut during the days, and in the evenings, she watches Clifford go on about his life. They don't spend much time together anymore since Clifford has Mrs. Bolton, and they seem pretty close, despite the age difference. Constance feels lonely again. She doesn't have anyone to interact with, and Clifford doesn't let her leave to visit Hilda under the pretense that he needs her there. On a dinner with his friends, Constance finds out that Clifford is thinking about investing in the mines. He doesn't want to write anymore since the bad review he received. Constance tries to change his mind, especially because the people in the mines already work in horrible conditions, but he ignores her worries. She leaves the dinner before finishing and goes to the hut. She's upset and tired of Clifford, and she needs some peace. Oliver is there too, and she tells him that she came to see the chicks. She tries to pick one of the chicks up, but she's clumsy and a bit scared that they are going to peck her. Oliver sees her struggling and approaches to help. He picks up one of the chicks and, holding her hand, puts it in her hand. Constance is really excited and happy with the chick, something that Oliver finds funny. For the first time ever, he smiles as he watches her. Constance starts crying with the chick in her hand. Oliver notices that she's crying and doesn't know what to do. He thinks about leaving her but decides against it. Instead, he offers to take her inside the hut. Constance apologizes for her outburst, but she's clearly not fine. On a whim, she hugs him while he remains stiff as a board. After a moment, he hugs her back and comforts her. They go back to the hut and Oliver tells her he's going to get some firewood for the fire, but she stops him and pleads for him not to go. She grabs his hand and starts kissing it. At first, Oliver is a bit baffled, but slowly he reciprocates her caresses. He grabs her face and they are almost kissing, but he steps back. When it's over, it dawns on Oliver that he slept with a married woman, the same thing that his wife did to him. He steps away from Constance without a word or a look back, and she shamefully gets dressed. They meet again outside the hut and Oliver offers to walk her back home. On the walk back, Oliver asks if she's alright, and she replies that she is. She asks him back and he nods. Then, she says she'll walk the rest of the way by herself and goes away without looking back. It's late when she arrives and all the doors in her house are locked. Mrs. Bolton opens it and Constance asks why she locked the door if she knew she was outside. The woman doesn't say anything, and Constance wonders about Clifford. Clifford didn't even notice she wasn't at home. Next day, Constance goes back to the hut with her book, expecting to see Oliver again, but he doesn't show up. The key isn't there either, so she doesn't have any way to enter. Some time later, he finally appears with the key, and Constance informs him she was waiting for him. Oliver questions if people won't get suspicious of her going there all the time, and Constance mockingly asks if he's afraid. Oliver is honest and says he is, but not of what people will say about him. He's afraid she's going to regret it. Constance shuts him up by kissing him for the first time, and soon they are intimate again. When it's over, Constance is the one to abruptly leave. Oliver follows her on her way home. Constance is troubled. She turns back to him and asks if she still feels like a stranger to him, and as an answer, Oliver kisses her again. Constance playfully pushes him and he tells her to come back the next day, not to the hut, but to his cottage. This time, when Constance is going home, she looks back at him. At home, all that Clifford talks about anymore are the mines and how he wants to modernize it. Constance pretends to be listening, but her mind is with a certain gamekeeper. She writes to her sister again, this time talking about her feelings and that her heart is opening again to another person, but it isn't easy. Next day, she doesn't go to meet Oliver and leaves her book behind. Mrs. Bolton calls her back with it and she tells the woman that she doesn't need it. Mrs. Bolton finds it suspicious and watches as Constance goes away. She stops at Mrs. Flint's house to play with her baby. Constance and the woman talk about babies and she takes the opportunity to tell her that she and Clifford are trying for a baby. Mrs. Flint happily tells Constance that she recommends having a baby, but Constance doesn't seem very excited about the prospect. Suddenly, Oliver appears to grab milk from Mrs. Flint and it's an awkward moment between them. Mrs. Flint leaves to grab the milk and Oliver covertly tells her that he invited him to the cottage, but she didn't show up. Constance acts aloof as she reminds him that she said she would try, and Oliver touches her hair and asks if she'll come later. Constance flinches away from him and doesn't say anything. When Mrs. Flint appears with Oliver's milk, Constance tells her that she's going back. Oliver offers to walk her home, but she declines. Oliver goes after her through a different path, something that Constance finds funny. He asks if she is running from him because she pulled back from him and didn't go to the cottage. She uses the excuse that Mrs. Flint could have seen, but Oliver is relentless. He asks her to come to his cottage again and she grins and says no because it's too late. They briefly kiss and Oliver asks her to follow him through the woods. He grabs her hand and stops in a clearing in the middle of the woods. He puts his coat on the ground for her and she asks him not to call her a lady. He wonders if she wants a coarser treatment with him and she says she does. They help each other get dressed and Constance doesn't even put her underclothes back. When they arrive at the gate where she walks by herself, she tells him that he's tender. Not gentlemanly, but tender. Oliver says that the gentlemen she's used to, including her husband, are a different breed. They are all dead. They feel no sympathy for people that are considered less than them, like Clifford with his idea with the mines. Constance tells him he isn't like any man she has ever met before, and he says that she's not like any other woman because she's beautiful. They lovingly kiss each other again, and when they separate, Constance confesses she didn't realize how lonely she was until that moment. She thanks him for helping her see it. Oliver stares at her with a strange expression and tells her to go. They kiss one last time, and as she leaves, Oliver watches with a serious look. As the days go by, Constance sees Oliver every day. Clifford is deep in his own world and spends most of his time with Mrs. Bolton, so he doesn't notice that his wife is always away for a long period of the day. Constance and Oliver enjoy their time together in a quite bucolic way. They even say marriage vows to each other, though with a slight change. Constance feels free and loved as she probably has never been before. Oliver is a great lover, caring, adventurous, and nothing like Clifford. He reads for her in his cottage when it's too cold to stay outside, and treats her as if she's the most important thing in the world for him. Their little bucolic dream is about to be over, though, because Constance starts feeling tender in some places, and starts wondering if she's pregnant. One evening, Constance is in her solar garden when Mrs. Bolton appears. She tells Constance that Clifford hasn't been sleeping well, so she keeps checking on him through the night. She explains that when her husband was alive, she did the same, and that even after so many years since he passed, she still forgets that he's gone sometimes when she's sleeping. Constance tells her that it's just the touch of him that she feels, and Mrs. Bolton looks at her strangely, but agrees. Constance continues saying how strange it is that someone can get so into your blood, and Mrs. Bolton agrees. She adds that it can make you bitter when you lose that person, like it made her. She also talks about the mines and how trapped her late husband was there. Constance replies that everyone is trapped somehow. They continue talking about love and marriage, and when Mrs. Bolton mentions children, she apologizes to Constance. She doesn't mind it, and says she still has hope to have children with Clifford. Mrs. Bolton is surprised to hear that, but she's too polite to mention the obvious, that Clifford can't father children. Constance continues by saying that his doctors say that his recovery is remarkable, and that she might still have a child. Mrs. Bolton carefully replies that she hopes and prays that she does. They say their goodnights, and Constance is left alone with her thoughts once more. Moving on, Oliver is walking with his dog on the grounds when he sees the estate. He stares at it for a long time to try and see Constance, but she doesn't appear. Mrs. Bolton, who was in Clifford's bedroom while he was sleeping, hears a dog barking and goes to check it out in the window. She sees Oliver walking with his dog and for some reason, finds it suspicious. During breakfast, when she notices that Constance is not having breakfast with Clifford, she wonders where she is. Clifford replies that she's on one of her walks after waking up early, and Mrs. Bolton subtly implies that Constance wasn't the only one up early. She starts saying that Oliver was also up and about when Clifford interrupts her to ask for some cream. Properly chastised, she does as he says. In the kitchens, the other servants are complaining about the mines and how much the workload got worse after Clifford took over. They also talk about Constance as if she's an arrogant lady, but Mrs. Bolton corrects them and says that Constance treats all the servants with dignity. The women change their tune and feel sorry for her, but Mrs. Bolton implies that their love life may not be as bad as they think. The gossip spreads. It spreads so fast that it reaches Clifford's ears by an associate of his. He's not displeased. In fact, he's quite happy that Constance did as he told her to do, and he will soon have an heir. Later on, he approaches her and asks her about the rumor. Constance replies that she hasn't, but she doesn't confirm whether there's some truth to it or not. Instead, she changes subject by saying that her father was invited to Venice and invited her and her sister to go with him. She tells him that she doesn't need to stay there for too long, only enough for her to find a person to sleep with and get pregnant. Clifford, totally unaware of how his wife spends the time, is bursting with happiness at the prospect of becoming a father. He tells her that he doesn't want to know the man's name and that no one can find out. Constance agrees. When she goes to Oliver's cottage, she asks him if he knows how much he means to her and then tells him she has to go away with for a while to Venice. He wonders if it's with Clifford, but she denies it. Then, she explains that she told Clifford she might have a child and that she may be already pregnant. Oliver stares at her with a dumbfounded expression. After some time, he aloofly asks what Clifford said, much to Constance's surprise. She thought he might feel some sort of way when he found out he got her pregnant. She replies that Clifford would be glad as long as the child looked like him. Oliver wonders from where Clifford thinks the baby might come from, and Constance says from an affair in Venice. Oliver asks if she's planning on having an affair in Venice, and she denies it. She's only going to pretend she did. Oliver understands that she started having an affair with him to produce a child for Clifford, which is not true. With a choked voice, Constance tells him that she never planned on him or the affair. Oliver interrupts her and questions what was her plan. Then, and Constance replies she doesn't know. Oliver immediately gets defensive and feels used. He tells her that it'll be how she likes. Then, Clifford will have his child, and Oliver has had a great experience with her. He tells her that she chose him because he had already been used before, so there was no problem with it. Constance ends the conversation by saying that she didn't use him. Then she storms out, leaving an angry Oliver behind. Constance goes back to taking walks with Clifford, and he explains to her that he is using mechanical tools on the mines instead of the human workforce. She tells him that it's no wonder that the men hate him, and Clifford snobbily answers that they don't hate him. They depend on him and should be grateful, otherwise they would starve. Constance gets upset with the way he's talking about the men as if they were animals, but Clifford feels justified to talk as he pleases because his station allows him to do it. Constance can't believe she's hearing her husband talk as if he's better than other people and that people he considers less than him deserve the fate they have because they were born like that. Oliver is passing through and Constance approaches him, but he motions to Clifford. Clifford's new mechanical wheelchair gets stuck and Constance has to push him. Oliver comes back to help and Clifford angrily tells him to take a look at his motor to see if there's anything wrong with it. When there's nothing wrong with it, Clifford stubbornly asks Oliver to stand back while he tries to force the wheelchair to move. Seeing him struggling, Oliver starts pushing him without Clifford noticing at first. When he does, he gets upset again and orders Oliver to stand back. While he's trying to make the chair move forward, he almost falls and it upsets him even more. He begrudgingly asks Oliver for help, but even Oliver struggles because of his bad lungs, so Constance steps in to help too. While Clifford is distracted, Constance asks if Oliver is alright and kisses him on the cheek. He abruptly leaves the couple. The wheelchair gets stuck again, and now Constance is at her wit's end. She stares hatefully at Clifford for the way he treated Oliver when he was only trying to help. When they arrive back home, Constance questions how he could treat someone that badly, especially a person who was also in the war and also had health problems because of it. Clifford scoffs and says it's not comparable. But Constance was frustrated and angry. She tells him that she finds his lack of common sympathy to be the worst taste imaginable. She thought he was different, but turns out he is the same as the other nobles. She leaves him with a befuddled expression that quickly turns into anger. Constance goes back to the cottage and this time Oliver is more welcoming. She apologizes to him for hurting him and tells him that she never wanted him because he could give her a child. She just wants him for him. She also tells him that for them to be together, Clifford needs to believe that she got pregnant to give him an heir, like he proposed. Oliver says that it's not about what he wants, because if it were for him, they would be together. But he also has a wife and needs to get a divorce from her too. Constance wonders what happened to his wife, and he explains that she slept around, but refuses to give him the divorce because of his war pension. They hug for a long time and Constance suggests they leave them all behind and go to Australia, a place where no one would judge them and they could raise their family together. Oliver says it's selfish to bring a child into such a bad world and goes on a monologue about humanity and how bad people are. Constance hears thunder in the distance and decides she wants to take a shower in the rain. They take off their clothes and start dancing happily in the rain as if they have no problems whatsoever. Back at the estate, Clifford is upset that Constance has been away for hours. Mrs. Bolton tries to comfort him by saying that it was probably because of the rain. Clifford wants to send people after her, but Mrs. Bolton convinces him to let her go alone. Oliver and Constance are walking together with only their underclothes when they stop to say goodbye and kiss. Mrs. Bolton calls for Constance and they quickly part ways. The woman tells her that her husband is looking for her, so Oliver leaves. Constance is angry that Clifford is now sending people to follow her, but Mrs. Bolton reassures her that he was only worried. When they arrive at the estate, Clifford is there waiting. Constance is still mad and tells him that he doesn't need to send servants after her. Clifford starts sputtering that he was worried, but Constance snaps that she was dancing in the rain naked. Clifford asks if she's mad and that Oliver probably saw her naked. Constance smirks and says that he probably did. Then she leaves him there, calling after her. In the following scene, Constance is staring out the window while Clifford creepily watches her. She is expecting Hilda, and when she arrives, Constance tells her all about her affair and Oliver. She tells Hilda that she really loves him, and that she would stay with him that night, before they left for Venice. When she tells Hilda that it's Clifford's gamekeeper, her sister's expression changes. Constance tries to explain that he's lovely and tender, but Rita is not having it. She says it's the German boy all over again, confusing carnal pleasure with love, and foolishly thinking it can continue because it's what she wants. Hilda advises her to come to Venice and think things through. But Constance yells at her that she's not going to Venice without spending one last night with him. She thought she would have her sister's support, but her sister thinks more rationally than she does. They pretend that they are leaving that day, but they are, in fact, going to Oliver's house. Constance introduces Hilda to Oliver, and when Hilda enters his cottage, she stares at everything with distaste. Oliver invites her to sit, and when she doesn't, Constance is embarrassed. Hilda asks her sister what she wants her to say, and Oliver intervenes by asking her to speak plainly what's on her mind. Hilda says that it's all right to have a good time in his cottage, but she wonders what is going to happen when they are out in the world. What Constance's friends back in London are going to think of her. Constance interrupts her sister and says it's not fair. Oliver adds that it seems as if Hilda has it all figured out. Hilda questions how he's going to take care of Constance when he loses his job and if he really believes he can give her happiness. Oliver retorts that she's asking the wrong person because all he gets from Constance is her happiness. Constance intervenes again and Hilda says that he understands better than Constance what is at stake, and that he should think about how much she means to him for him to ruin her life like that. Although at first he was defensive and abrasive, what Hilda says gives him pause. When Hilda leaves, Constance apologizes for her sister's behavior. Oliver says that she's right, they haven't thought about the long-term future. He knows that Clifford will not give her the divorce easily and much less the child. They get intimate for the last time before her trip to Venice. They are surprised by someone knocking on the door very late at night. It's Bertha's new man, there to get half Oliver's pension for her. Oliver threatens him and he leaves. Next day, Constance leaves for Venice early. As they are leaving in Hilda's car, they pass through Mrs. Flint's house. She notices that the car with the two women came from Oliver's cottage direction, and finds it odd. As for Oliver, as soon as Constance leaves, he burns the clothes she left behind. Constance isn't excited or happy to go to Venice, and it shows. Hilda asks her to try and look more excited, and Constance finally admits she thinks she's pregnant. Hilda is surprised, but not shocked. Constance tells her that Clifford said that he would be happy if she had a child with another man. She also says that she doesn't know for how long she can continue in her marriage, and her father arrives right at this moment. He wonders what they are talking about, and Constance explains she's in love with another man. His father is quite pleased that she has taken a lover. He's very open-minded and her situation is delicate. When Constance mentions getting a divorce, he advises her that if does so, she will gain very little from it. He also tells her that feelings come and go, that she can love as many men as she wants, but if she leaves Clifford, she loses the riches. Meanwhile, Bertha's man goes back to Oliver's cottage when he's not there. He starts looking for money but finds something better instead. A woman's burnt silky nightgown. He grabs the piece of fabric and all the money he can find, but before he can leave, he accidentally bumps into Constance's book and it opens on the first page, where her name and surname are written. That same night, Bertha's man opens his mouth in the pub and starts spouting lies about Oliver and Bertha, making him the villain in the situation. Soon the gossip spreads until it reaches Clifford's ears. Mrs. Bolton overhears a conversation he's having with a friend of his that he advises Clifford to fire Oliver, despite the truth of the rumors. She runs to call Constance to warn her of what is going on in her absence while Clifford is fuming. He calls for Oliver, and when Oliver appears, Mrs. Bolton informs him that she called Constance, and that she's coming back. She tells him that Constance will meet him at the hut so they can decide what to do. Oliver realizes what is going on and subtly tells Mrs. Bolton to not mingle in the matters lest it becomes her problem too. When Clifford and Oliver are face to face, Clifford tells him that his indecencies have caused trouble to Constance, and that her name is being slandered. He tells Oliver that a book with her name was found in his cottage is being used as proof of their liaison. Oliver sarcastically says that he may have an affair with the Queen because he also has a picture of her on his wall. Clifford fires him and Oliver leaves with his head high. Constance arrives at Mrs. Flint's house and tries to talk to the woman. But Mrs. Flint is afraid that if someone tells Clifford that she's talking to Constance, he'll take her land back. Mrs. Flint treats her badly and doesn't let Constance explain anything. Constance runs through the woods towards Oliver's cottage and finds him packing. They kiss as if it's their last time together until Constance notices his bags. She asks what he's doing and he explains that now that everyone knows, they can't be seen together anymore. Constance tries to make him leave with her, but Oliver interrupts her to tell her that he has nothing. No job, no home, or even a purpose in the future. Constance says it doesn't matter because he's everything to her. They are interrupted by some man yelling at Oliver that he needs to leave. They kiss each other again and Constance asks him to promise her they are going to share their lives. Oliver promises to when the time comes. Oliver grabs his meager belongings, tells Constance he'll find her and kisses her one last time. The moment he leaves, Constance crumbles and starts compulsively crying. A few moments later, she goes back on the same path she has done many times, back to the estate. Mrs. Bolton tries to stop her from entering the house, but it's pointless. Constance goes straight to Clifford's bedroom. He's surprised to see her there, but her presence confirms that the rumors are true. He questions why she would do something like that, and Constance replies that it was his idea. He denies it, because in his head, he suggested she go with a nobleman, a man of his scale, not a servant. Constance says that Oliver is better than any man she ever met. Then she admits she's going to have his child. Clifford is shocked. He says he can't claim the child now that everybody knows of her affair with Oliver. Constance replies that he doesn't need to because she wants the divorce. That baffles Clifford more than anything because for him, their marriage was perfect. But to Constance, it was terrible. She tells him that she tried to follow his rules and support him any way she could, but that he gave her nothing in return. Not a drop of affection or kindness. Clifford says that he always cared for her, and she replies that he cared for her as he cares for an object. He tells her that he loves her, but it's not enough for her. Clifford pleads for her to explain to him what he needs to do, and she tells him that he needs to let her go. He finally tells her to go, but bitterly adds that he will never grant her a divorce, because she broke her word and made him a joke in their town. When she leaves with not a tear shed for their broken marriage, Clifford starts crying. Before she leaves for good, she asks Mrs. Bolton to tell her if she hears any news about Oliver, and where he went. Mrs. Bolton agrees and emotionally wishes that Constance finds her gentleman. Constance gives her a smile while holding back tears and thanks her. Constance goes to Venice, but not even the romantic city can raise her spirits. Back at the estate, Mrs. Bolton tells the other servants that Constance asked them for any information on Oliver's whereabouts because she loves him. Mrs. Bolton tells the women that she left everything behind for him, and that she won't hear a word against them. The women all feel for the torn lovers. Months go by with no news about Oliver. Constance already has a baby bump and she cut off her long hair. As she walks around Venice, she sees the same man that was a friend of Clifford's and tried to flirt with her months back, but he ignores her completely. Not only there, but the other nobles are looking down on her too. She tells Hilda she wants to go back to London. Back in her hometown, Hilda surprises her with a letter. It's from Oliver. Constance desperately reads it and finds out that the news that she left Clifford reached the small village where he was living, in Scotland. The story being told, though, was a love one, about a noble lady who gave up everything to be with the man she loved, a gamekeeper. He found a job and a cottage to reside in the middle of the Scottish moors. Constance arrives at his new cottage and calls for him, but it seems he isn't home. Constance starts wandering without a destiny when he appears behind her. He hugs her and they finally kiss. And the love story between the noble lady and the gamekeeper has a happy ending.